So Jane, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katja. So my name's Jane Manning. I'm a director at Allies and Morrison Urban Practitioners, but this morning I'm more talking in my capacity as sitting on the editorial board for Urban Design magazine and as the coordinator for the Global Climate Change Digest, which is the regular feature within the magazine. I suppose I want to just talk literally for a couple of minutes just about sort of the importance of the climate framework for us as urban designers. Firstly, I think it's a really fantastic resource, a beautifully simple idea about bringing information together. The fact that it links with the UN Sustainable Development Goals is great. Pieces that everyone recognises, but I think if many of us are honest, have felt quite paralysed as how to use them. It also sort of does a big job in the sort of sense of the open source sharing that many of us have signed up through via Architects Declare and other campaigns, providing a really basic platform of bringing what is already public into one place, but that information taking some serious searching, and a huge sort of kudos to the work that the group have done in bringing that all together. It's great to have the tiers of information that Mina talked through. I think particularly to draw people in rather than scaring people off with sort of huge levels of technical information that perhaps as urban designers have at times struggled with to properly engage with. I think the fact it's a living resource as well, it will stay up to date, it can gain real momentum, and having the audience and readership updating and feeding into that. So I would hugely encourage all urban design group members to join the climate framework and really engage and help support keeping it up to date. But I suppose particularly why it's important for urban designers, there's a sense perhaps sort of that we've gone through perhaps some waves of confidence and action over the last 20 years, from at times feeling super empowered, that our scale is where sustainability really hits and where we can make big, meaningful interventions, and that we've got a really big role to play, whether it be around the sort of neighbourhood scale of being able to properly embed district heating networks and properly getting to play with those, or thinking about some of the basics of layout and street and building alignments. And those sort of levels of empowerment have happened at different points, but were particularly strong perhaps around sort of 10 years ago with the sort of dawn of the Stern report, the emphasis that CABE was giving around sustainability in urban design at that point, the sustainable cities work with the English core cities. And there was a sort of major point there. It's happening again as the circular economy debate grows and our role becomes really clear within that. But there have also been periods within that 20 years of perhaps feeling less confident, perhaps a bit more out of the debate as the building scale and architecture became the real main play, whether it be around the sort of focus of assessment frameworks like BREEAM, or about sort of the emphasis on building regs. And suddenly that point of targets and where elements really bite was very much at the building scale. It feels very much over the last 5 years, we're now regaining that empowerment, particularly as that knowledge and examples clear the path. And the climate framework is a really big and important part in that. As part of the Urban Design magazine, we've been trying to capture and further empower urban designers through the content in the magazine. And the Global Climate Change Digest is a very small way to try to support that, but it was really about trying to capture some of the latest research and information out there within the much wider kind of global climate change scientific community particularly, and make that relevant to urban designers' day-to-day work. And so that regular feature within the magazine tries to really sort of make that relevant, an understanding of what people can do with that data, how that feeds into baseline analysis, and more and better understanding of context and future trends. But there is an issue that I think sort of all of us have perhaps recognised, whether consciously or subconsciously, that perhaps there's a challenge of the scale that we work at. In many instances, we're setting the framework rather than delivering the intervention. We're often setting the tone and perhaps establishing the basics. but perhaps it doesn't always bite until the ground is broken. And between setting that framework and ground being broken, there's a lot of time and space for things to change. And in many ways, it means that us as urban designers need to know it all, from the full gamut through, from planning all the way through to the detail of architectural targets and standards, in order to establish the most robust and flexible design framework. We need to be able to anticipate what moves the architects may want to make when the individual buildings get designed, and create the space for the very best ideas whilst designing out the unsustainable loopholes. And so we've got a big pressure on us to understand everything, but also to be able to understand what are the allowable exceptions that we need to build in, how we ensure mitigation and adaptation is optimized through the work that we do. And I think that brings us to a kind of key point that Mina was talking about around a common language, and that being really critical to this. In many cases, we're kind of agreeing parameters and thresholds, setting design codes or sort of elements within a design framework. And we need to be speaking the same language, and the framework allows us a proper sort of space to be doing that. As the Global Climate Digest has shown us, there's a wealth of data out there, but we need the knowledge to properly use it. And that sort of will be in very different ways in sort of the sort of whole gamut through our career, whether that's sort of, you know, in a senior role and needing to fully understand the whole set of headlines across all 6 themes within the climate framework, or whether it's at a graduate level, or indeed through our learning at university, where we can properly feed into the sort of data analysis tasks and precedents and have those properly informed by the very best and cutting edge information. So I suppose in conclusion, there's fantastic things out there, and you know, brilliant work that's going on, from kind of genuinely zero carbon neighbourhoods, urban design, to zero waste master planning and regenerative design. But now it really feels like the climate framework can be the sort of one place where we need to look to for advice, examples and methods, and therefore I'd really support, you know, us as urban designers supporting the initiative. So thanks, Katja, for the chance to talk.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you bringing it round and focusing it on that scale of the urban design, isn't it? And the difficulties that often sits at that framework master planning level, if you kind of do an, you know, best framework and then you hand it on to someone else. So, you know, you're holding it and you're giving it the best position to move forward, but you're not necessarily in control. And that is something that I think the urban design profession is constantly struggling with, as you say, putting it on really good footing, preventing the really bad, but leaving opportunities. So that kind of, yeah, constant debate about that. And